Hey guys, it's Jill, and it's Saturday, August 18th, and it is my Awake-aversary. Who knew? I woke up today, and I don't know, I was pretty sad, and my skin was like crawly, and I thought, what is this, right? So I just went back to bed, and I was like, well, it'll pass or it won't. And if you're on a spiritual path, then you kind of understand like how energy works, right? So some days if you're just called to be in bed, then you're gonna be in bed, right? Like that just is whatever it is. That's Robert Freeman back there. Um, but I, I just I've been reflecting lately on a lot of my truths, and I know that my truths don't always align with what everyone else is thinking and viewing. And, about 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago today, I woke up in a new reality. I had been called about a week prior to teach at the Westminster Presbyterian, and I had accepted the position to be a toddler teacher, and I had about 3 weeks to get a whole classroom in order and some kind of semblance of a curriculum. And I was taking the kids camping. My ex and I were taking the kids camping, and so we went up to Letchworth State Park, and we spent about 3 days. Now, we couldn't get a spot there, so we stayed at a place called Four Winds Campground, and there was this beautiful creek behind our campsite. And so on the last night, I was letting the kids play in the creek, and I decided that the water was cleaner in the creek, I think, than the sink at camp. And I said, I'm just going to wash our dishes in here. So I did. I washed all of the pans that I had used, to make our food that night. And some sweet corn. And I think that's important, actually, which I don't know why, but I washed all of these pans and I rinsed them, down dish soap, and I rinsed them in the creek. And I put them away, and we had some s'mores, and we hung out with the neighbor, and the neighbors were cool. They'd been there for a while. They were, like permanent campers for the summer, and, they offered us some party favors, and I declined because I had a lot going on. And the next morning, I woke up, and the whole world felt new. It felt different. Like I don't know, like jumped timelines or shifted somehow. And it was the first time that I really became aware of like chemtrails. When we were on our way home that day, I looked up in the sky and there were all of these white lines, and I was like, what is this, right? They were like grid lines. So I took a picture of them. And they're posted below this video because I actually put them on my timeline. So I started questioning, what are these things? And I got a lot of answers like, oh, it's just water vapor, blah, blah, blah. And something inside me was like, no, this is not right. And then I started looking, into like food additives, things I was feeding my kids. And it all came rather slowly until about maybe a month later, I had an episode where the back part of my brain shut down. And there were questions whether or not I had Lyme or I had MS or, possibly I had had a mini stroke. And I didn't get answers for a really long time, actually. It ended up being like 6 to 8 months before a doctor at the Guthrie Clinic in Pennsylvania looked at me and said, we think you had a hemiplegic migraine. The back quadrant of your brain turned off. And I was like, oh, because what had happened was the whole right side of my body sort of went limp. It went numb and tingly, and then my face fell, so I had Bell's palsy. And that, if you've ever had that can be extremely painful. So I spent a lot of time with like myofascial massage, and I spent a lot of time on a lot of drugs. And that one was hard because I had every doctor I went to, the neurologist, the family doctor, the ER doctors, and I'm trying to think, there's one more, and I don't remember. Oh, the rheumatologist, right? So they're all putting me on these different medications, and the big two were gabapentin and tramadol. because one is an opiate, and one is, I don't even know if they know what it is. It might be for like nerve conduction. I know they're handing it out like candy to people with fibromyalgia, and we'll talk about that another time because that's really just a made up thing. It's actually psychosomatic. But so a couple of months in, when I was really like fighting to get my movement back, and I was fighting to get, you know, some semblance of order back in my life where I could get up and go to work and not be miserable and exhausted every day, or where I wasn't coming home every day and taking a nap. And my saving grace on that was that I was only working half days because it was a half day preschool program. So I could, you know, be there with my kiddo. Thank goodness my littlest one got to go to work with me. And then we would go home and I would have time for her and I to both take a nap before I had to go to my son. And finally, someone said to me, they're like, why are you not using the plant? You know, like, get yourself off these medications because they're probably not helping you. Because the more that I took the medications and the more doctors I went to, the more they started questioning. And we finally got to a point where they were like, maybe we should try this. I forget what it was called, but it was like an IV therapy. And I was like, absolutely not. We're not doing that. So I started using the cannabis plant. Now, if you want to talk about like a spiritual crisis or an existential crisis, okay, this is where I was at, because now I'm teaching in a church and I'm teaching little children, and I started questioning, like, is this ethical? You know, can I do this? Because society says, no, this is bad, this is bad. And I decided that after a couple of days, I was no longer exhausted all the time. Like, I actually started to feel better once I came off the medications. And I put up a lot of boundaries with the cannabis plant. Like, I wasn't doing it during the day, certainly wasn't doing it when I was driving around. You know, I was doing it at night before I would go to bed, or before I would, you know, start to unwind for the day and give my brain sort of that release. And at that time, I was guided to start journaling. So anything in my life that came up, I was journaling. And there was a lot of childhood trauma that came up. There was a lot of, you know, things that I had done in my life and things maybe I had done to other people. There was a lot of things that I started to make amends for, right? Or that I started to just account for and sort through and be like, hey, maybe that wasn't my fault, or maybe that wasn't supposed to happen that way. Maybe that, you know, that's not okay. And so within 3 years, I had separated mostly from my toxic family. I had separated from my kid's father. And then I was called to home visiting for OCFS. And that was a really big call because I got to see a lot of things that were wild and crazy that were going on. And I got to go into people's homes and see how they were parenting their children and how those cycles would affect and move forward with their children. And it was extremely eye-opening. And this is where I've learned that I can't get mad at people for not waking up, because the spiritual awakening will rip you apart. And it will tear you open and it will dismantle everything. And I mean everything. Okay, so in 2019, now we're 4 years down the road, I've pretty much gone all natural with my kids, and we're never using sunscreen again. And, you know, we're not taking pharmaceutical medications, and we're eating, you know, organic fruits and vegetables when we can get them, and they're actually organic. That's a whole nother story, because the further we get down this road, the more atrocious it gets. And the reason for that is because, you know, there are entities or powers that be in place that have skewed the system because they know that a lot of people aren't awake, right? And so we're just like blatantly taking advantage of that, because people who aren't able to think for themselves, or who aren't aware of all of these things that are not good for them, are very easily controlled, and they're manipulated. And, you know, the general population wants to exist in the status quo, which is why when I say things like from a heart center, or I say things that are outside the realm of what everyone else is thinking, they think I'm nuts. But my spiritual awakening has been a blessing and a curse, you guys. I have surrendered so many things. I have surrendered vehicles. I've surrendered my home twice now. Okay? But Could I ever go back to living in the false structures that I was living in? No. No, even if I wanted to. I'm too far awake to be able to be like, well, let me just see if I can exist within this realm. And it's hard. It's really hard. And it's hard because my kids want to exist inside those structures. And it's hard because sometimes I have to still buy the golden grams and the Lucky Charms, you know? Because we still have to live. We have to exist out here. And understanding that, you know, the companies like Monsanto are huge, right? Like, how do we fight back against that when they just approved this appeal, the organic chemical, which is an oxymoron in itself, you guys, okay, that they're spraying on all of our produce when they're growing everything from GMO seeds. There's almost like no escape. And as we move forward again into things like digital currency, digital ID, 5G surveillance and facial recognition, we're going to start closing doors behind us that humanity's never going to get back through. Okay, and so then our human sovereignty, the reason that we're incarnate here as humans, is going to start to diminish. Okay, and it's going to be almost like we're going to become, I don't even want to say the word robots, we're just going to be like zombies. And a lot of people already are, and unfortunately, a lot of kids right now really are, with their screens in their hands and just the constant, like, having to be, you know, and the boundaries have been blurred on everything. Boundaries on sexuality, boundaries on sexualization, you know, and sexuality is one of those things, too, that as I really came into my humanity, that I started to realize that it really is just like a non-binary. Like, you can wear what you want, do what you want, be who you want, just be friggin' happy, because, you know, life is too short to be unhappy, and you're going to have days where you're going to be unhappy. Like, I ran into Dumb and Dumber. I crossed paths with them yesterday on accident, and, you know, I really spent the last year, like, wanting to die. Like, once I felt like God stole from my womb, I was like, this is not a place that I want to exist anymore. I don't want to exist inside these structures. I don't want to be here. You know, why am I standing so far outside of society? And why is this my call? Because it seemed really, really unfair. And then this year, when I was really questioning, like, what is God doing? And, like, why is he punishing me? I watched him exact revenge. And I was like, oh, well, so it's given me a little bit of hope, like a glimmer of hope that something is coming. And there's a dragonfly. I don't know if you can see him. It's given me a glimmer of hope that maybe someday I'm going to get back the things that I've lost and get back to, you know, some semblance of normalcy, and I'm going to have a partner, and I'm going to have my family, and, you know, some, like, idea of what life could be like, because for the past couple of years, it's just been really, really hard, and I'm exhausted, you guys, and speaking the truth, and trying to hold the line, and trying to find a job that's not ridiculous, or that, you know, I see a lot of things happening in the workplace too, where people are just being exploited, and that is so hard for me. But what are you going to do when everyone's living in poverty? And that, again, is just another government game that we're playing out right now. But it's up to us. It's up to us whether or not we're going to awaken. It's up to us whether or not we're going to move forward together. It's up to us whether or not we want to be making healthy choices. And it is individual, you guys. It is so individual. And I fight with myself all the time. Like, is that a door that I want to open? You know, going down the road with pharmaceuticals, going down the road with the, you know, the agriculture and the produce, and going down the road into the chemical dyes, going down the vaccine hole. And I wasn't even given a choice on that. As soon as we started heading to COVID, God was like, you're going to surrender your vehicle, you're going to homeschool your kids, and we're not playing that game. Like, that's not something we're going to do. I was like, oh, okay. So, you know, just remember that no matter what, the Holy Spirit is always, like, within you and helping you to move. So if you're questioning, like, which way do I go, or, you know, does this seem right to me? Check your gut. Check with God. Ask, you know, pray about it. And whatever you decide to pray on, or whomever you decide to pray to, is very individual as well. I have my feet in the water here. I don't know if you can notice, so. And that's, this is kind of where I find my church. Am I going to go to church tomorrow? Probably not now after this, because this is, I'm here. This is, look at this. Isn't this magnificent? It's spectacular, right? This is God's creation, guys. This is why we're here. We're not here to eat chemicals or to fight about ignorant things like race or, who wants to wear what colors to school or if little Tommy's wearing a skirt. Those things don't matter, guys. They don't matter, okay? Just love on one another, and that's another thing that my spiritual awakening really dragged me through, was a lot of religion and philosophy. And I actually ended up with a degree in religion and philosophy because of that, because I wanted to know what is happening, and is this right or is this wrong, and why am I questioning these things, and am I living right, and by whose standards? By society's standards, by God's standards, by my own standards, by my family's standards? And all of those things combine to make up who we are. And a lot of those things are false. And I've talked about that before, because those are things that are false structures that are given to us when we're born, right? So if you are questioning anything, or if you are starting to awaken to different things and you feel like you're losing control or you're losing your mind, feel free to reach out to me. I was offering classes, introduction to holistic sciences, parenting. I tried, you guys didn't come, and I even threw them out there for free a couple of times, so I don't know. I know not everybody wants to go down a new road. I know it's hard to grow and to shift like that, but I think that, eventually, if it's your time, you're going to be forced to, and that was really what happened to me. God was just like, okay, it's your time, and here we go, and snapped his fingers, and I woke up, and all of a sudden, the trees were a little bit greener, and the skies were the wrong color, and and so here we are. But anyways, it's been 10 years. It's been a bit of a crazy road. There have been some highlights. Homeschooling my kids was the joy of my life, to be honest with you. They were old enough to be self-sufficient, and we were on the road, and we did, so many things, especially New York State curriculum. We went and saw the Liberty Bell. We really learned, how this country was founded and what we're supposed to be doing here, and that maybe what we're doing here isn't what we're meant to be doing here, or at least not in the direction of where we ever thought we were going to go. So, alright, I'm going to be quiet now. I love you guys. Have a great day. Happy anniversary to me, even though it's been a crazy ride. And I'm going to cancel the Minecraft camp because nobody reached out and wanted to come. It's cool. It's disappointing a little bit, but it's not surprising. I'm just really hoping that eventually people are going to come along, and, I'm going to find my tribe, wherever that may be, because, we're in a small town, and maybe that's what I need, is just to get somewhere where there are like-minded people, and hopefully there's going to be more very quickly, right? Hopefully. Alright, love you guys. See ya.